Welcome to Stealing from Wizards Volume 1, Pickpocketing, by R.A. Consul, read by the author. Chapter 21, Lunaseed. Kuro's life improved considerably after the true authors of the IOU notes had been revealed. He still wasn't very popular, and some were still distrustful of him, but people were taking much less notice of him, which was far more comfortable of a state. He also received a few unexpected apologies. The girl who had chased him across the school for stealing her diary was deeply sorry, and a few thieves said sorry as well. One of the many benefits of having his name cleared was sleeping in his own bed. He had been welcomed back to the dorm by the other boys. Oliver and Sean in particular were both very apologetic. The dormitories were not full, however, as Sean Cassidy had taken Kuro's place in sleeping behind the couch as penance for forging a note. His note, as it turned out, had been a prank on Oliver, and he hadn't stolen anything at all. Oliver said the thumping he had given Sean in the amphitheater was more than enough to satisfy him. Sean, to his credit, said that it wasn't Oliver's forgiveness that he needed. He didn't feel right without serving some kind of sentence. The best part of the whole business being done was being with his friends again. They no longer had to pretend at being enemies and could sit close together in class, though Charlie and Kuro were often separated for talking anyway. They could share meals, play at breaks, and work on homework together in the lounge and library. Kuro was, for the first time in his life, happy. He even had some hope for the future. He was almost passing all of his classes. With Ms. Crawley's help, he was almost keeping up with his classmates in spellcraft, and he was starting to get the hang of numerology. Evocations was the only class where he was still really struggling. Kuro just couldn't get his thoughts into the shapes they were supposed to be. Sabine Elisar's visit in February brought good news as well. He would have a place to stay for the summer. There was a space at the orphanage where Meredith and Bella lived. He was so excited at that news that he completely forgot to feel like a prisoner in the school. He was starting to feel like he had a home and a family at Avalon. He no longer dreamed of escape, and his only thoughts of his master were of loathing instead of loyalty. He dashed to alchemy class to share the good news with Charlie and the others. Class was just getting underway when he skidded to a stop in the room, having run at irresponsible speeds to get there. He slid to a stop beside Evelyn, who glared at him with unrestrained hatred. Evelyn had been caught as a note writer, but she had suffered little for it. She was too clever and popular to lose any followers. The girl she had stolen the notebook from was a pimply and awkward girl named Genevieve Frankelstein, who was frequently the butt of jokes from Evelyn's troupe. Evelyn had somehow come out ahead and seemed more popular than ever. She had not taken the detentions well, though. She had vehemently claimed that the punishments were draconian and that her very important parents would not stand for it. She had, of course, never actually told them about it, as that would admit some fault. Flint had made her clean the girls' washrooms without magic for one of her detentions. Kuro expected it was the first time she'd cleaned anything, or been punished at all for that matter. Evelyn couldn't bring herself to take any responsibility for it, and so she blamed Kuro. She had moved from being dismissive and disparaging to actively despising him. This shouldn't have made Kuro happy, he knew. It was unwise to make enemies. If you were to have enemies, it was far better that they did not know it. These were lessons taught to Kuro by Phineas, and even though Kuro had come to loathe his old master, he saw wisdom in those words. Regardless, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of satisfaction that she now hated him as much as he hated her. He had found that the best way to infuriate her was to ignore her. She couldn't stand anyone not caring what she thought. Kuro smiled politely at Evelyn and hurried back to take his seat beside Arthur. The commotion about Kuro being innocent had forced de rigueur to take some notice of Kuro again. With that, he bothered to recognize that Kuro's work was pretty good. Consequently, Arthur had been awarded bonus marks for helping Kuro with his potions. Arthur tried to argue that it was the other way around, but de rigueur wouldn't hear of it and gave Arthur another bonus mark for humility. This, too, angered Evelyn. Ironically, it was only because she had demanded so much of de rigueur's attention that he had never noticed what was really going on. They were to be making a blooming brew that day, which, when poured on seeds, would cause flowers to grow much more quickly. Evelyn, in a transparent attempt to garner more of the teacher's approval, was handing out flower pots. Duttiger lounged at the front of the class while he explained. Evelyn was kind enough to help me prepare these pots for you before class. Each should have a different kind of seed in it. If your potion is successful, you should get a surprise when your flower blooms. He clapped his hands once to indicate that it was time to get going. Instructions are on the board, and I expect a healthy bouquet on my desk by the end of the day. As they went about milking the honeydew from giant aphids and simmering it in dragon spittle, Kuro noticed that Evelyn was acting very strangely. She was unusually quiet, neither bragging to her followers nor asking Duttiger about changeling-related facts. She kept glancing mischievously at Kuro, though. It was very fishy. As the class drew to a close, Duttiger rose from his chaise and called them to attention again. All right, it seems like nearly all of you have a good, hearty, blooming brew, but we won't know unless we test it. All together now, ladle out a good dollop into your flower pots. Everyone poured a spoonful of the thick brown ooze into their pots and waited for something to happen. Soon, several small green sprouts started to poke through the surface. Before any flowers could bloom, Evelyn ruined the suspense by putting up her hand. Kuro waited for the inevitable, misplaced jab at him about changeling trivia. When I was fetching the pots from the greenhouse for you, Professor, I saw a container labeled Lunaseed. What is that? She asked sweetly, feigning curiosity. Duttiger, never missing a chance to show off his expertise, explained. Oh, Lunaseed is used to grow moon blossoms. Moon blossoms are very interesting flowers, you know. They glow bright white like the moon the moment they bloom, but fade to a dull gray within a few seconds. He illustrated the effect with a little illusion. Shapeshifters like lycanthropes, kelpies, and changelings cannot stand them where they are in bloom. It drives them feral. They have long been used as a means of detecting fairy folk in the skies. It was once thought that it was the light they produced, but an old colleague of mine has determined that the pollen contains a hearty dose of gold iron, to which most fae are badly allergic. Fascinating, no? Kuro turned to Arthur. He wasn't really paying attention. Evelyn's attacks on him had become so routine as to be dull. Evelyn continued her assault. She shot a devious look at him and Arthur before she started to speak again. Oh, are they dangerous at all? I think that the container has spilled into our flower pots, she said in her sweetest, most innocent voice. Just as she said it, the first flower bloomed, filling the class with cool white light. Kuro looked around at the pots. Dozens of sprouts were growing quickly. Blooms started bursting open all over. Kuro looked to Arthur. His face had twisted in pain and concentration. He was gripping the table, white-knuckled, as if trying to hold himself in place. His hair was falling in and out of its perfect part. His lip curled fiercely, and Kuro could see that his teeth were shifting and twisting in his mouth. Evelyn faked a scream and pointed at Kuro in feigned horror, but quickly realized her mistake as her scream had broken Arthur's concentration. With his focus broken, his shape started to shift violently. Spines erupted down his back. His teeth grew sharp and jagged. Scales and feathers sprouted all over his skin, and his hands elongated into claws. Arthur started to panic, shrieking and growling and thrashing his arms to keep other students away. Kuro grabbed him around the waist and tried to keep him from hurting anybody, but his shifting form was hard to keep a grip on, and Arthur was bigger than Kuro. Arthur snarled viciously at the girl who had done this to him and bounded across the classroom at her, Kuro in tow. He bore down quickly on Evelyn, snapping and growling. She had frozen in place. Her prank had worked, but she had not been prepared for the result. Kuro, still being dragged behind Arthur, heard himself yelling for Evelyn to run. Arthur was inches from Evelyn and looked to be lunging for her throat. Kuro heard Duttiger casting a spell. Before either had a chance to connect, Arthur was intercepted by a flying stool. It yanked him from Kuro's arms, carried him across the room, and pinned him against the blackboard. With Arthur knocked clear, Duttiger's spell missed the mark, and a silky violet streamer struck Evelyn. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and she dropped limply to the floor. Duttiger squeaked like a terrified mouse at what he'd done. Kuro ran to help Arthur, who was struggling to escape the cage made by the legs of the stool. Charlie called out to him to stop, though. "It's okay," Charlie said calmly. "I got him." Kuro turned to see Charlie lying limply on the floor and focusing her attention and considerable telekinetic skill on the stool. She slid the stool down the wall, lowering Arthur with it, so that his feet were touching the ground. "Oh, you're okay, Arthur. Nobody's gonna hurt you," she said in a soothing tone, as if she were talking to a spooked animal. Kuro heard de rigueur start to incant, making a liar of Charlie. Kuro jumped in the way, blocking Arthur from whatever de rigueur was going to cast. "Get out of the way, boy," de rigueur shouted. "He's not safe." Kuro didn't move. He put his arms out to the side and tried to block more of his friend. With Arthur held firmly in place, Charlie managed to move herself. She struggled to her feet and put a calming hand on Arthur's head. "You're fine. That's all right. You're okay," she kept repeating over and over, and Arthur's growls slowly faded into wheezes. "Move!" pleaded de rigueur, trying to find a gap around which to fire. He found none, mostly because Marie had added herself to the blockade. "Miss Akinwande, please get out of the way. This is very dangerous." Kuro risked a peek over his shoulder. Charlie had let the stool fall away, and Arthur was standing freely, though she looked ready to pin him down again should the need arise. It didn't look like she would need to, though. Arthur was breathing more steadily. He was still an untidy assortment of shifting shapes, colors, and sizes, but the panic had faded from his eyes. "Get out of the way!" snarled de rigueur, his usual passive attitude completely gone. He stopped trying to aim around Kuro and instead leveled his outstretched hand at him. "You do not understand the danger you are in!" Kuro stood firm and backed closer to Arthur to better block the way. To his complete shock, he bumped into someone. Sean Cassidy had also joined the blockade, and he saw Oliver Kagan moving to do the same. Magnus Singh joined them a little more cautiously, followed by other lodgers, Jennifer Tanaka and Morgan Greenwood. Kuro stared defiantly at de rigueur and the frightened collection of other students. The teacher considered carefully, not lowering his hand, but not moving to cast either. Minutes passed as the Luna blooms burst with bright white light. Finally, the last one faded to gray, and the rasping wheeze of the monster shifted into the sniffles and sneezes of a sad boy. De rigueur still didn't lower his hand. "How are you feeling, Arthur?" he asked in a tone that was both wary and warm. "I'm fine," mumbled Arthur. He had made no effort to return to his usual form, though he looked mostly human again. And while his eyes were downcast, they did not stare so fixedly on the ground as normal. "Would you accompany me to see the nurse just to be sure?" asked de rigueur. "Yeah, all right." Arthur shouldered his way through his housemates. Kuro still tried to block him from de rigueur, not trusting the teacher. "It's okay, Kuro," muttered Arthur. "I'll be fine." He slouched out of the room in front of de rigueur, who had lowered his hand but still moved with caution. "Class is dismissed," he announced on his way out of the room. Everyone was a little uneasy as they slowly fetched their materials and books and shuffled quietly out of the classroom. Everyone except Kuro and Marie, that is. They had not forgotten about Evelyn. She still lay unconscious on the floor at the edge of the room where de rigueur had accidentally hit her with a spell. Kuro looked down at her helpless form and fought the strong urge to kick her. "She should probably go to the nurse as well," grumbled Marie, nudging the unmoving girl with her foot. Evelyn did not stir. Kuro grudgingly agreed. They shouldn't just leave her in a heap on the floor as much as they wanted to. It took some effort, but they managed to shove her into Kuro's book bag, then trudged down the many flights of stairs to the ground floor. Marie suggested how pleasing it would be to have just dumped her at the top of the flight and watch her tumble down, but the smile in her eyes told her that she didn't mean it. They deposited her as unceremoniously as they dared on the floor outside the large oak doors to the infirmary. Kuro felt it best not to have to explain why they were in possession of an unconscious girl or how they got her there. So they knocked on the door and ran when they heard feet approaching. Not before leaving a little something for Evelyn, though. Kuro's altruism had already been stretched to the limit, and the idea that Evelyn probably wouldn't suffer at all for her actions seemed extremely unjust. Also, Kuro still had a little bit of mustache cream that Arthur had given him for Solstice, and Marie had her own contribution to make. Arthur didn't return to any classes that day, nor did he appear for dinner. The school was buzzing with the news of a changeling on the island, though, which quickly got twisted. There were stories of a bloody attack and rumors of a death. Kuro did his best to quell the gossip, but his small voice had little impact on the chattering horde. When Kuro returned to his dorm room that night, Arthur's clothes were gone, and his trunk was missing. Kuro was mortified. He worried that Arthur had been expelled, or worse. He rummaged through the remains of Arthur's things and found a dirty sock that had been missed. Mustering some optimism, he cast the returning charm on it and let it lead him to his friend. He was still not very good at it. The sock pushed itself reluctantly along the floor like an inchworm. It took minutes to even get out to the lounge. When he got there, it did not lead him to the door as he had expected. Instead, it brought him to a familiar dark corner behind a large sofa where Kuro had slept for much of the year. There, curled into a corner and wrapped in a blanket so as to be almost invisible, was Arthur. "Are you all right?" asked Kuro as he rushed over to his friend. "Did Duragur hurt you?" Arthur had his face buried and did not answer right away. Slowly, he lifted his head to look at Kuro. His hair was hanging down over his face in dark green tangles, as if he were wearing a wig of seaweed. His eyes were bloodshot from crying, peeked out behind the tangled mats. "I'm fine, Kuro," he said unconvincingly. "What are you doing here?" asked Kuro. "Are they kicking you out of school?" "No," mumbled Arthur. "I'm not in trouble or anything. I just didn't think the others would want to share a dorm with a changeling." Kuro imagined that Arthur might be right about that. He remembered how the other boys had treated him when they thought he might steal from them. They were probably like a changeling even less, especially if they believed any of the stories of him turning into a violent monster in class. Kuro wasn't going to let his friend sleep alone, though. "Wait here!" He pulled the pillows off his and Arthur's beds and started dragging them back to the lounge. He was intercepted by Oliver and Sean, who both looked worried. "Do you know what's happened to Arthur?" Sean asked fearfully. "He's sleeping in the lounge," replied Kuro, giving each boy an accusing glare. "He thinks you're afraid of him. I'm going to join him." Kuro did his best to storm defiantly out of the dorm, but that is very difficult to do when carrying a large pile of bedding. It ended up being more of a surly shuffle, but he hoped they got the impression anyway. Kuro delivered the bedding to Arthur and set himself up beside him. "Thanks," said Arthur, still sulking. "Not at all," said Kuro. Arthur was quiet for a while as he arranged his blankets and fluffed his pillow. Slowly, Arthur's hair returned to its normal sandy blonde color and shortened enough to let his face show through. He seemed to be making no effort to keep his appearance stable. Eventually, he broke his silence, speaking quietly, so the others in the lounge wouldn't hear. He asked, "Can you tell me what happened in the class after the flowers bloomed?" "Don't you remember?" asked Kuro in astonishment. "Only sort of. I remember feeling really sick and had a really bad headache and pain in my chest. I was scared and couldn't see clearly. My eyes were changing too fast. Then it's sort of hazy until I woke up with Charlie patting my head like a dog." Kuro explained as best he could about his shapes, his trying to attack Evelyn, Charlie trapping him, Duragur blasting Evelyn, and the whole class standing in the way so Duragur couldn't attack again. "Did they really do that?" asked Arthur, getting a little teary-eyed again. "Yeah, they did," replied Kuro a little bitterly. Something that he hadn't been able to express had been clawing away at the back of his mind since it happened. "I guess they like you better than me. Nobody would have stuck up for me like that." Arthur opened his mouth to argue, but he didn't get the chance. They were both startled by a voice from above them. "It's not like that," said Oliver defensively. He was poking his head over the top of the sofa and looking in on their hiding place. "Look, we messed up once. We didn't want to do it again. I just kept seeing Ms. McCutcheon's angry face in my head, yelling at us that we should do better. And then all of a sudden, I was standing there with you." "Really?" Arthur and Kuro said together, unbelieving. "Yeah," replied Oliver resolutely. "Now make some space." He threw his pillow and blanket over the back of the sofa and started to climb in to join them. He was followed by another hail of pillows and blankets as Sean Cassidy clambered over. "What are you doing here?" "Same as Oliver," said Sean indignantly. "Besides, I'm still sleeping down here this week, remember?" "Aren't you afraid of me?" asked Arthur, pushing himself back into the corner away from the boys. "I mean, a bit," admitted Oliver as he laid at his bedding. "But you've had lots of chances to kill us and take our places this year. And you haven't. I'm not so worried." The four boys had never really spent time together. They started to share their adventures of the year so far. Oliver and Sean's hadn't landed them in the nurse's office quite as often as Kuro's, but they had been in a brawl with some Wertheim boys and on the winning team of a junior lacrosse tournament. Oliver had also singed off his own eyebrows in evocations class, and Sean had made a turnip explode all over himself when he was trying to practice telekinesis. They weren't able to talk for long before being overheard. Charlie's head, with hedgehog-like hair, appeared over the back of the sofa, grinning. The boys barely got out half an explanation before she loudly declared, "Sleepover!" and ran to get her things. She reappeared soon after, dragging her bedding and a reluctant Marie. Their growing pile of bedding soon attracted Meredith's attention, who resigned herself to keeping a responsible eye on the impromptu slumber party and claimed the sofa for herself. Word spread, and the party grew. Soon half of Autumn Lodge was camped out in the lounge room in solidarity. The story of the day's events was retold a dozen times, usually by Charlie, getting more elaborate every time. The older students applauded the first year's bravery at standing up to de rigueur. They comforted Arthur's worries about being a changeling, though he was forced to spend 5 minutes changing his hair color. He was so embarrassed by the attention that he was having trouble turning it and any other part of himself any shade except fuchsia. It turned out that Arthur wasn't the only oddity in the room. He was comforted by Meredith, who talked about her ogre heritage. A fairly short high school senior with unusually large feet explained that his grandfather had been a Barbagazi, and a girl claimed that she was 1/64th Jinn, but it didn't do her any good. The room was boisterous and joyful, and every square inch of space was covered with blankets, pillows, and loudly talking students. It felt to Kuro like his first real night at Avalon. It didn't feel like a prison or like everyone was spying on him. The whole lodge was together and happy. The older students shared stories with their juniors about past adventures. Charlie's magic brush was passed around the room, and half the students ended up with strange hairstyles. Seniors showed off their trickiest spells, turning pillows into marshmallows and making silverware waltz. A few of them got together and enchanted the hardwood floor to be soft and yielding, like the stone benches in the amphitheater. Slowly, the chatter in the lounge died down, and everyone started to drift off to sleep much later than they should have. Kuro's was the last set of eyes in the room to shut. He was too happy to sleep, and didn't want the return of classes the next day to spoil his mood. When sleep finally took him, he had, for the first time in memory, pleasant dreams. Thank you for listening to Stealing from Wizards. If you liked our show, please consider rating or reviewing on iTunes. If you want to support this podcast, or just can't wait for the next chapter, the full book is available on Amazon, Kobo, and Indigo. Our theme music was written by Camille Saint-Saëns, transcribed by Franz Liszt, performed by Rebecca Verdun, and used with permission. This episode was produced by Jim Tigwell.